Hey everybody, it's Mike, and welcome to Chip Damage, and happy Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, or Dia de los Muertos, or whatever. Point of the matter is, it's late October, it's spooky season. I'm in that spooky mood. And I've made it no secret in my prior videos that I'm a huge fan of horror in all its form, but particularly of horror video games. And we're kind of in a renaissance of horror right now. It's really great to be a horror fan right now with big companies, big franchises like Capcom's near annual releases of big Resident Evil titles like 7 and 8 and the remakes of 2 and 3 and the future release of the remake of Resident Evil 4, the announcement of the revival of Silent Hill with 4 games and a movie recently being announced, the remake of Dead Space on its way, the Callisto Protocol from the original developers of Dead Space, and a number of indie titles all coming out, all looking great. It's a great time to be a spooky fan. And throughout my travels, throughout my collecting, and just my circle of friends and people I've met at conventions, I have found that horror fans of horror video games in particular, are some of the most passionate gamers out there. They're super into their franchise. They follow it for years. And that has kind of led to horror video games being some of the most collectible games out there. When horror fans get these games, they keep them. And it's kind of a niche genre in of itself when you step outside the Resident Evil world. So like these games become rare and valuable. And as I've noticed, some of the games that I've collected just being a horror fan over the years are some of the most sought after games in my collection. So with the spirit of the season being what it is, I decided to do this video where I'm going to go over a good chunk of my horror collection, talk about them, because it's just that time of year, isn't it? Now, this isn't every horror game that I own. If we did that, this would be a much longer video, but these are some of the big ones, some of the more niche ones, some of the more collectible ones, and just some of my favorites. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into this. If you like what you're about to see, if you're a horror fan, please like and subscribe and let me know what are your favorite horror games, what are some hidden gems, what are some of your favorite big franchises. Let me know all of that in the comments below. So let's begin, shall we? And if it wasn't any secret with the gentleman standing to my right, obviously I'm a big Resident Evil fan. Let's start with the big dog in the yard, Resident Evil, and start with that. So first thing I'm going to grab is the most accessible way to play these games these days. Capcom has been really good with re-releasing and making their prior games accessible for the most part with this main franchise. And on the PS4, the Xbox One, you're able to get pretty much every numbered game in a remastered form some way. So yeah, right here, let's go through the entire numbered franchise. You got Resident Evil Origins, that's Resident Evil 0 and 1, with some extra bells and whistles, like being able to play as Wesker in Resident Evil 0. Resident Evil 0, no one's favorite Resident Evil game. It looks great to this day. Difficult game, kind of oddly designed, still fun. Resident Evil 1 Remake, though, is kind of like one of the greatest remakes of all time, especially when it came out. It was an intensely scary game. It was an intensely fun game, faithful to the original while building it. It's one of the few remakes that kind of outright replaces the original in a lot of ways. You got the excellent Resident Evil 2 remake, which came out in 2019, which was just fantastic. Everyone loves this. Doesn't outright replace Resident Evil 2, but is a fantastic remake in its own right. Beautiful game, difficult, scary. A lot of people love this. And then you have the slightly controversial remake of Resident Evil 3, which I loved. Yes, they cut some things, and Nemesis did not look as cool as it used to, but they made Jill way cooler than ever before. The game was quick, but it made it like very easily replayable to kind of like go through multiple times and unlock things, which is what I did. So I ended up really liking the remake of 3. Yet again, doesn't replace the original. It was sadly not supported as much as the other games. There was no like downloadables for like not many for this game. DLC. Really wish they added a Mercenaries, but hey, what can you do? And then you have one of the greatest games of all time, unquestionably Resident Evil 4, which is, like I said prior, getting a remake in the near future. Can't wait to pick that up. Got the collector's edition pre-ordered, guys. Look forward to the unboxing. But this game has been released on everything under the sun. I don't need to explain this game to you. If you haven't played this, it is as good as people say. Check it out. Then you have, yet again, the controversial Resident Evil 5, which yeah, of course, isn't as good in the single-player sense as Resident Evil 4, but it's one of my favorite co-op, if not my favorite co-op game of all time. This game still looks good. It plays good. It feels good to play. Chris punches that rock. That's the meme, but you know what? I think it's funny. Love this game as a co-op. Got to give this a shot if you've ever hesitated. Resident Evil 6 is as bad as they say. This is an overblown mess. It controls fine, but there's just something about it. It's so action-y that it's boring. It doesn't quite feel like Resident Evil. It has a good mercenaries mode for co-op. Enemies don't quite react as well as they did in 4 and 5. Like sinking a bullet and having like an appropriate reaction was a big thing in 4 and 5. Like if you shot an enemy in the knee, they acted appropriately, or in the face. It's not quite as relevant in RE6. It's not quite as terrible as most people would have you say. It's an okay action game, just kind of a bad Resident Evil worth the $20 that you can get this remaster for. Of course, you got Resident Evil 7, which probably after Resident Evil 4 is my favorite one. Really revived the franchise, brought it back strong. Great, surprising campaign from the first-person point of view. And a number of great DLCs that you can all pretty much get all gathered on the disc with the Gold Edition. I don't need to talk too much about this. And the most recent release, Resident Evil 8 Village. Great game. I don't think quite as strong as 7, but a fantastic release that just got a bunch of DLC, which I've yet to play through. That's kind of going to be my Halloween treat, to play through the DLC on this. Fantastic game. Worth checking out. Really looking forward to where the series goes after this. But I don't need to talk too much more about Resident Evil, but one of the things I want to talk about is how fantastic like the multiple number of releases are. This is the most, like I said, accessible way to play this, but I own some of these games multiple ways. You can get pretty much the whole franchise on GameCube as well. And these are actually up there in getting up there in value, some of them, but you can get Resident Evil 0, its original release on GameCube. You can get the original remake on GameCube. You can get 2 and 3. These are pretty valuable at this moment. But yeah, these were kind of based on a Dreamcast port that we'll be talking about in a moment. And these were great ways to play the game. They are not up to the standards of the Resident Evil 1 remake, but they are fantastic games in their own right. And then you have the Resident Evil Code Veronica X port on GameCube, which I do not have, which is very valuable. I own that game on multiple other consoles, but the one game I kind of want on the GameCube that I just to complete the set is Resident Evil Code Veronica, strangely valuable on the GameCube. But that also came on the PS2, where it was very easy to find, and came with a demo for Devil May Cry, if I'm not mistaken. Came with a Devil May Cry demo, so definitely worth checking that one out. And then the original release of Resident Evil 4 on GameCube. Fantastic looking game, but we all, like Capcom knew right away this wasn't going to sell enough on the GameCube, so it was very quickly ported over to the PS2 in a more complete, uglier, but more complete version, where it doesn't look quite as good, but it has extra things, an extra Ada Wong campaign, some extra costumes unlockables, but there's something charming about this GameCube original. And sticking with Resident Evil and just going over the many ways that I have this franchise are some of the more collectible titles. Like I said, Resident Evil 2 and 3 were brought over from the PlayStation to the Dreamcast, and these are pretty valuable now. These ports, they were not well advertised, and they were just not a huge print run of these. But these are a great version. They look slightly better than the PlayStation version. And if you're looking to get like the classic versions, the non-remade versions of the Resident Evil games, I'd go with Dreamcast or GameCube, but the GameCube has some nice bonuses. Like you can see your character's health on the VMU memory card if you have that plugged into your Dreamcast controller. It has some extra unlockables. Some things are unlockable from the start that aren't in the PlayStation version. And, you know, anytime I can promote the Dreamcast, I will. But, yeah, Resident Evil 2 and 3, kind of valuable on the Dreamcast at this point, must say. But the big Resident Evil game for the Dreamcast was the aforementioned Resident Evil Code Veronica. Now, this is decently common, but this was a big thing for the Dreamcast at the time. Dreamcast, somewhat of a niche console, and PlayStation was kind of the brand to go to for Resident Evil. So when they were going to bring a big budget Resident Evil game over to the Dreamcast, there was some contention. Originally, this was Resident Evil 3, as the story goes, and this was just a side title called Resident Evil Nemesis. But Sony demanded that their game be the numbered one and the Dreamcast one not be. The Dreamcast one has no number. Despite this game and the canon, the lore of the game, being probably more important than Resident Evil 3, or at least as important, this game is kind of lost to time because the name would lead you to believe it's just a spin-off title, but no, this is like a main title where you play as Claire Redfield, and Chris Redfield shows up, and Wesker shows up. This game was obviously, like I said, ported to the GameCube and PS2 with 10 minutes of extra cutscenes and changed visuals, and those are more accessible ways to play, at least the PS2 one is, but there's something charming about playing the game on its original hardware, which is the Dreamcast, kind of the premier Resident Evil game on the Dreamcast. But going further back in time, and this is one of my more collectible titles, back on the Dreamcast's predecessor, the Saturn, there actually was a Resident Evil 1 release. Yes, this is a very rare title, very sought after. It launched right around a little bit after the original PlayStation version, and it has some different features, like a different mercenaries mode, like a full mercenary. Like it was a precursor to the mercenaries mode in prior games. It looks a little different. The polygons for this game, the way the Saturn did polygons, like kind of forced the game to look a little different. Some people say worse. I just think it looks different, but it's a unique curio that a series that is so closely tied to the PlayStation also had its original release on the Saturn, the only Resident Evil game on the Saturn. And it's definitely worth hunting down if you're a big fan of horror and Resident Evil, but the prices on this are astronomical at this point. There's much cheaper ways to play the original Resident Evil in any of its forms than this, but I'm glad I have it. I got it before it got too expensive. Resident Evil on the Saturn, definitely a gem in my collection, something I keep near and dear to my heart. But and that kind of does it. I have other ports and other spin-offs of Resident Evil, but that's not what you're here for, right? Everyone knows everything about Resident Evil. We got to move on to the second biggest horror franchise. Despite not having a new release in about a decade, one of the most legendary horror franchises, of course, the Silent Hill franchise. Yes, what can I say? Silent Hill differs than Resident Evil because it is more of a supernatural horror. And quite honestly, the difference, especially back in the day between Resident Evil and Silent Hill, was that, yes, Resident Evil is a better game. It plays better, as it were. Like there's more kind of thought thrown into it. But Silent Hill was actually scarier. It was more atmospheric in many ways. And that was the thing. Capcom kind of nailed the formula of being creepy, but at the core being a very good game. Silent Hill is a good game, but it is not technically as proficient in the way it kind of is set up, like inventory and ammo and all that stuff, collectibles. No, but it is a scarier game in many ways. Like Resident Evil 1 to Silent Hill 1, yes, Silent Hill was a much newer game releasing in '99, but it was just leagues ahead in terms of sheer terror. This game is still scary to play. Unfortunately, this game has not been re-released as much as its sequels. The only ways to really play this are to either have an original copy or to download it on the PlayStation 3, which you could still do. It's probably the cheaper way to do it if you still have a PS3 laying around. But I love this game. I got this game in such a weird way. I used to work at a GameStop years and years ago, and so PlayStation 1 games were no longer being accepted, and a customer came in trying to trade this in. I'm like, I can't accept it. It's on a console we no longer support. They're like, I'll give it to you for $20. And I just bought it off them. Even at the time, this game was like $100 otherwise. So I got this on the cheap. And then I finally had a physical copy of this game. And I'm glad I do, because this game showed that, psychological horror, like games could be deeply, truly scary. It was one of the first games to really show that off, even with its polygonal graphics. Silent Hill 1, fantastic game. Now, the remake of this game has just been announced, and that is Silent Hill 2, also the Restless Dreams version as seen here. Game originally released back on the PS2, and then shortly after the original Xbox. There's some multiple versions of this game. Differences, there's the original PS2 release, which is just as it is, and then there was this Xbox release called Restless Dreams, which had some extra stuff. There was an extra playable scenario with Maria, one of the characters in the game. There was a whole new scenario and ending. And then when the PlayStation 2 version became a greatest hits version, it reincorporated these Xbox features into that. So the greatest hits and regular version on the PS2 are different. Like I said, the greatest hits version is actually a port of this Xbox version. And they look slightly different. I've seen some comparisons, like the lighting is better in the Xbox, and maybe the fog effects are better in the PS2. They're very close. Like if you're playing, you're not really going to notice too much of a difference. But the Xbox version is much more affordable, and it is just as feature rich as the PS2 greatest hits version. So if you want to play the original version of this before the inevitable remake comes out, this is probably the cheapest way to do it, to get it on your OG Xbox. It is much better than the later Silent Hill 2 remaster on the PS3, which is fine. It's playable, but there's something like the Xbox version is far more close to the original PS2 version in terms of quality. But moving on is a game that was strangely not ported to the Xbox or any other console, and that is Silent Hill 3. Yes, yet again, this was eventually remastered in the maligned Silent Hill HD collection, but there's something about this original PlayStation version. It came with the soundtrack back in the day, which is actually pretty sought after collectible. This game is pretty rare at this point. This did not have an Xbox port. As you're about to see, Silent Hill 2 and 4 had an Xbox port, but 3 did not. And 3 is a lot more beloved than 4. I don't know why. why this didn't get a port, but you must hunt down the original PS2 version if you want to get an original copy. There's no other contemporary port of it. And this game is fantastic. A lot of people like this one. It's debatable whether it's better than 2 or 3 is the best one. 2 is kind of seen as the best one, but 3 is a close follow-up. Really love this game. Still looks great. Very creepy look, very beautiful look of this game. Silent Hill 3, Gem, you got to check it out. Then you have, like I said, Silent Hill 4 on the OG Xbox. No differences really between the PS2 and Xbox version. This game was not remastered in the Silent Hill HD collection for whatever reason. Not as good as its predecessors 2 and 3, but still a solid game. It runs very oddly backwards compatible. I wonder if that's changed. I remember trying to play this on my Xbox 360 back in the day, and there's some weird graphical glitches. Very technically proficient game, still worth checking out. Silent Hill 4: The Room on Xbox or PS2. And then you have the end of the Team Silent era, and you have some other Silent Hill games that were still good before the series kind of careened off a rock and disappeared. You have Silent Hill Origins, originally released on PS2 and PSP. I have both versions, but the PS2 one is the one obviously I'd like to play more because it is a home console. A bit more rare, somewhat of a collectible game. Takes place before, obviously, Silent Hill 1 in terms of the lore. This was an American-made Silent Hill game, and it has a different vibe, but it's still a solid title. It doesn't look as good as its predecessors, being constrained originally to the PSP, but it's worth checking out on either one of those consoles. I think it meshes with the lore of the old Silent Hills strongly enough. It's not a bad game. Like I said, of the latter, after 4 Silent Hill games, it's probably one of the stronger ones. And then you have the last Silent Hill game that I would end up buying before kind of the series. I lost interest in it, and that is Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Yes, and I have both versions of this game. This game was released on PSP, Wii, and PS2. The PS2 one being incredibly valuable these days, and even the Wii one going up in value quite a bit. So what is this? This is, the best I could put it, a very kind of reimagined Silent Hill 1. The reason I have 2 versions of this is this one forces you to use the Wiimote, and this one you can use a standard controller. But however, the Wiimote controls on this are quite cool. Like, you get grainy phone calls, creepy phone calls through the Wiimote speaker. Use the flashlight, which is kind of like your major tool with the Wiimote, and it works pretty well. It's pretty accurate. But the PS2 one looks a little different. They've reincorporated like classic controls into it, so they're pretty different versions of the same game. Highly collectible, so I wanted both, and I got both. And that'd be the last Silent Hill game that I got. I never picked up Downpour or Awakening or anything like that. I played them briefly, wasn't into them. This was my Silent Hill collection. I'm like, I think I'm done with the series. Of course, until the legendary PT demo, which I played and loved, but that never came to fruition. But with the future releases coming out, I'm very interested in what those 4 games are, particularly of Silent Hill F and Silent Hill 2 Remake. Can't wait to see what they're going to do. Are they going to be as good as the classics? I don't know. That's kind of, I have some thoughts on that. But we're going to see soon, aren't we? I'm glad that Silent Hill still exists, though. Konami doesn't make games anymore, like brand new games, so I'm glad that they are at least outsourcing their old properties to more passionate developers. And we're going to see how that goes. Now, those are the two big dogs out of the yard, right? Silent Hill and Resident Evil. However, they are not the only kind of horror games I have in my collection. Obviously, I have many more one-offs, more obscure titles, and that's what we're going to be talking about now. Some more of the smaller titles, the one-offs, and the horror-adjacent titles. So to begin, it's one of my more collectible games, because like I said, horror games kind of disappear and become hard to get when they're not called Resident Evil, is Haunting Ground, also made by Capcom. This is one of my most valuable games in my collection. Haunting Ground was an odd thing. It was a horror game by Capcom, released late in the PS2's life cycle, which was a great time for Capcom games like God Hand and Okami and Beautiful Joe. But this one was not marketed at all. This game kind of just appeared one day, as far as I remember, and was immediately rare, immediately hard to find. And this game is very valuable now. You play as this girl Fiona, who's mysteriously locked in a castle after a car crash, who's protected by a white German shepherd as she must kind of find her way out of the castle and explore it and figure out why she's there. I won't spoil it, but it's a good game. It looks really good. This game is very rarely referenced outside in other Capcom games. There is a Fiona costume for Cammy in Street Fighter V, and that's it. That's they never talk about this game or reference it much, but it's a solid horror title. I don't know about if the price that it is worth getting it for, but it's worth checking out as a collector, as a horror fan. That's Haunting Ground on the PS2 and not in really anything else. And yet again, an incredibly rare and valuable game of mine in my horror collection is the legendary Rule of Rose, another late PS2 game published by Atlas. This game is kind of legendary amongst collectors for how rare it is. This game had a bit of controversy back in the day, like especially in the UK, where it was pulled off the shelves for a moment because they said it was like promoting child endangerment. It's not. It's weird. It has nothing like too gratuitous in it. It's more of a psychological horror. And this game is incredibly valuable. This game, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. It's never been re-released on anything else. The problem with it is it's not great. Like, it's creepy, it's atmospheric, but the game is just like okay at the best. Like, I feel it involves a dog yet again. There's some cool things about it. It's not the most terrifying game, but there is a unique weirdness, that J-horror weirdness that this area is so well known for. But I don't know if that's worth the hundreds of dollars people are asking for this. How did I find this? When Blockbuster was going out of business like over a decade ago, it was in their bargain bin for me in like this pristine condition with the disc and manual for like $10, and I picked it up not thinking that it would be in my top 5 most valuable games later down the road. And after playing it, a little disappointed, but it is a unique curio horror gem in my collection, kind of showing how valuable horror games can really get. And let's go back to Capcom, I should say, and talk about one of their other franchises that they are neglecting these days, and that is, of course, Dino Crisis. Now, there's 3 main Dino Crisis games with a spin-off, like, side shooter on the PS2. What I'm holding here is the very little talked about Dreamcast port of Dino Crisis 1. This is odd. This came out after the original PlayStation version. There is a Dino Crisis 2 on PlayStation, which is a fantastic game, but that was not ported to the Dreamcast, strangely. It was only Dino Crisis 1 that was ported. This game is what people say it is. It is Resident Evil with dinosaurs, but the problem is velociraptors in practice are far more deadly than zombies. They are stronger, faster, and smarter. This is a very difficult horror game. I love this game, but as a kid, I could not beat this game for years. I wasn't till my mid-20s till I went back and had to replay this to actually beat this. This franchise has been teased by Capcom. They haven't entirely forgotten it, but they want people to kind of forget about it. It could be because Dino Crisis 3, which was an original Xbox exclusive, was terrible. I hate that game. But 1 and 2 are fantastic, and the cheapest way to probably play them now are downloading them on your PlayStation 3 if you still have that. They're like $5 to $10. But if you have a Dreamcast, you're looking for some survival horror action, I don't believe that this port is too expensive. Unfortunately, if you want to get Dino Crisis 2, you have to, physically, it is only available on the PlayStation 1. But Dino Crisis, my girl Regina, hope she comes back one day. We'll see. I doubt it, but hey, you never know. Jumping over to a franchise that is also getting a little bit of revival, we're going to be talking about the Fatal Frame games. Yes, so what is Fatal Frame? Fatal Frame is a Ring Grudge-esque horror game where you kind of usually play as a female character who can only defend herself against otherwise invisible spirits by looking at them through a camera. And that camera has the ability to kind of ward off the ghost, and you can protect yourselves. Now, these games, like I said, are having something of a revival because it's had kind of a weird life. The games Fatal Frame 1, 2, and 3 were PlayStation 2 titles, and 1 and 2 were re-released, as you've seen here, on the Xbox with additional content. These versions have never been re-released. Otherwise, the Xbox versions, which are kind of like the best versions to get and kind of cheaper than the PS2 versions, which I have, but I wanted to kind of put on display the Xbox versions because it's not really talked about a lot. Xbox did that a lot. There's like some hidden ports with like more content. However, Fatal Frame 3, which I do not have yet, is a PlayStation 2 exclusive. Not super valuable, but like getting up there to like that $100 range. And then there was Fatal Frame 4, which was a Wii exclusive in Japan. But as of the time of this recording, I believe it was announced that that is finally coming over to the West on the Switch. So Fatal Frame 4, the lost game in the franchise, which had involvement from like Suda51, is coming out over here. And then there is Fatal Frame 5, The Maiden of Blackwater, which has a weird release, which is a Wii U downloadable only title in the United States. And then it was re-released on the Switch. However, the Wii U version has exclusive Nintendo costumes that the Switch port does not have. That Switch port also coming out on PlayStation. So like they had to remove those costumes from both versions for whatever reason. But yeah, for collector's sakes, if you're looking for the old 1 and 2 collections, you can get them on PS2 where they're pretty expensive. Or you can get the better versions on the OG Xbox for the most part. And they're both known as the Fatal Frame Director's Cut. Not quite as expensive, getting up there. Great series. No combat per se, but these games are all about the jump scares. And this game will get you. This is a creepy game. This is a creepy series. Very good franchise to play. And sticking with the OG Xbox is a console exclusive that is getting kind of sought after, a late life exclusive, and that is the Call of Cthulhu, made by Bethesda. This is a creepy, obviously H.P. Lovecraft inspired story that you play through. It's a big game. It's a difficult game. Like, there's such cool features. It's played from the first person point of view. If you stare at some of the eldritch horrors in this game for too long, you start losing your mind and taking damage. There's no HUD, so you have to, when you're handling farms, you have to remember how many bullets you have. It's just a very cool, deep, like really fully featured game that was only released on the OG Xbox and then later on PC, but I've heard that port isn't fantastic. So kind of the best way to play that is here on the original Xbox. It's strange that the OG Xbox has so many great horror games or re-releases and enhanced ports of horror games when it's usually not like too associated with that genre. But like along with Fatal Frame and some of the enhanced ports of Silent Hill, yeah, man. Call of Cthulhu, Xbox is kind of a horror machine, but Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, this isn't getting a release. Definitely check it out if you're into like some more psychological, more difficult horror games for sure. And sticking with the OG Xbox is we're going to go look at the console port of Indigo Prophecies, which I believe overseas is known as like Fahrenheit. Okay, so like this is more of a cinematic horror game, horror adjacent really. It's like a mystery kind of. This game is bizarre. Not too expensive. I believe this has been re-released other two places, but the OG release on the original Xbox is still something worth checking out, and that is Indigo Prophecy on the OG Xbox. Weird title, like I said, known as Fahrenheit in other regions. And the last OG era Xbox game we're going to be talking about right now is The Thing. Yeah, a lot of people know that this was made on the PS2 and Xbox, but this was actually like a good game. This game is difficult, intense, and incredibly nerve-wracking. It is a sequel to the classic 1982 John Carpenter's The Thing, and it takes place very soon after those events. And you have a team of members, a party of members helping you kind of investigate what happened in that Antarctic base, and you must kind of figure out, divine through blood tests and other means and dialogue, who is infected by the thing, who is the thing, as it were. And it's an intensely scary process. You're always low on ammo and flamethrower fuel. The setting is great. This game got some publicity back in the day, but like going back and replaying it, even with its kind of blocky visuals and as an early PS2 Xbox game, it's fantastic. And if you're a fan of the film, you really should check this out, The Thing. This is a cheap game that you can get on those consoles that's not getting re-released. If you want some good scares, some good thrills, The Thing, please check it out. I'm telling you guys, it's a good game. So let's get into some weird games. Let's get into some horror adjacent games. Horror adjacent is a term that's kind of popping up a lot, and how I kind of define it, or how I see it, is games that are horror in terms of they have the horror trappings, the horror design, the horror look, the creepy effect of monsters without trying to scare the pants off of you. Some people don't like that. Some people don't like the jump scares or the dread. They just like the dark gothic look or the dark gory look without the actual scares. And that can be a lot of fun, especially if you're not in that mood to, have a small heart attack every 5 minutes. And one of my favorites of these horror trapping games is The Typing of the Dead, which I've done a whole video on in my rare Dreamcast videos, where it is a House of the Dead 2 clone, but instead of a gun, you are using a keyboard to fight. You must have the Dreamcast keyboard, and what will happen is an enemy will appear, and there will be a word over their head. You must type that word quickly, and that's how you defeat that enemy. It's very nerve-wracking. It's very fun. It can increase your typing skills. This game is pretty collectible now. It wasn't at the time that I got it, especially along with like 2 Dreamcast keyboards, because yes, this is a co-op game, and the in-game models for this, like the actual characters, have Dreamcast strapped to their back and keyboards on their front. Great game, great creepy fun. Increase your dexterity, increase your typing skills. If you're a Dreamcast collector, hunt this one down. This isn't getting re-released. There's like some weird PC sequel, but no, you want to get this one as it was on the Dreamcast with the keyboard. That is Typing of the Dead. And speaking of weird Dreamcast games, one of my more collectible games is Illbleed on the original Dreamcast. Yeah, this game is infamous. This was a very late Dreamcast title, and I struggle to call it a horror game. But it's so weird, and it has the horror trappings. I guess I should call it that. It is a bunch of students are invited to go to a theme park, the eponymous Illbleed, and throughout that theme park, you go through events. Attractions that kind of lead you into other stories and gameplay styles and weird stories It is very truly hard to describe succinctly Illbleed, but let me just tell you, you go through some very odd horror-esque situations, and the game is so odd, it's actually kind of unsettling, kind of like in that David Lynch Eraserhead way. Like, this could not be, it was like kind of intentionally made bad. I don't know how to describe it, but if you were looking for one of the weirdest games out there, especially on the Dreamcast, look up Illbleed. They're never going to re-release this. This game is highly collectible, but if you were looking for one of the most unique games out there that has horror trappings, Illbleed is that for you. This game has like imagery that isn't supposed to be that scary, but for some reason just sticks with me and scares the hell out of me. Like I said, very David Lynchian in that way, without any of the intelligence or thought behind it. But there's something about Illbleed that has made it a legendary title. Look into it, check it out, see if it's right for you, hunt this one down. It is a Dreamcast exclusive gem. But let's come to a more modern era. Let's go to the early 2010s with a horror-adjacent title. We're going to be talking about Shadows of the Dam for the 360 and PS3. I don't care what anyone says. I love this game. Originally a collaboration between Suda51 of No More Heroes fame and Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil fame. They did not direct this game, as it is misled. It was just kind of an odd project that they had in mind that EA twisted into a third-person shooter, that much like Resident Evil 4. But still, what we got was still very cool and memorable. It is not a high-budget game, but there's something about it. The shooting mechanics are very good. The character of Garcia Hotspur that you play as here on the cover is fantastic, and his talking gun Johnson. I went through this game multiple times, and even it is definitely a style over substance thing, but it's funny. It's still weird and outlandish, and the story is very dreamlike. It's worth checking out. Sadly, I doubt this will ever get re-released. It was not a good seller. It is getting more valuable, but get it as you can. Someone who likes punk rock aesthetics and horror, this was kind of a game like made almost exclusively for me, despite it not living up to the creator's kind of vision. Still a cool game. Shadows of the Damned on 360 and PS3. Check it out. God, I hate when EA ruins projects, but they couldn't fully ruin that one. And if you only have a PS3, right, and you don't want to hunt down an OG Xbox copy of Silent Hill 2 and 3 or PS2 copy because they're very expensive, you can get this kind of maligned Silent Hill HD collection, where a lot of the fog is removed and there's glitches and there's redubs of, I believe Silent Hill 3 has an option, and like I always forget because I haven't fully played through this and I haven't played through it in many years, but one of the games has a brand new dub that you cannot change, and one of them has an optional new dub that isn't quite as good. But you know what? These games are incredibly rare, and if it's the first time you're actually playing them, you might not notice the issues. It's kind of only purists who are bothered by it. Yes, the fog isn't as foggy in these games as I remember, and many people will know, but it's still cool to have, and it's probably the last time these original versions are going to be re-released, and it's still super cheap in comparison. So you know what? Not all of us are made of money. I'm certainly not. So if you want a cheaper way to experience two of the greatest horror games and not their best form, but still very playable and fun, Silent Hill HD Collection on the PS3 and 360. However, I do suggest the PS3 version that I'm holding because this version was patched to run and look a little bit better. The 360 version just didn't get that patch. Very strange. Still cheap. Check it out before the remake comes out, and the value of this probably shoots up. Another horror adjacent series is the legendary Parasite Eve games, which everyone knows it was a kind of Square Enix horror RPG series where the first two titles were on PlayStation 1, and their re-releases can be purchased on the PlayStation 3 for a decent price. However, something that will probably never be re-released is right here. This is Parasite Eve 3, but it was actually titled in the box The Third Birthday. This is a weird game. Okay, so Parasite Eve 1 and 2 came out on PlayStation. Then over a decade later, on the PSP of all things, exclusively, the third title was released without the Parasite Eve 3 branding, which is maybe because there was such a gap, they thought that, like, the Parasite Eve 3 wouldn't carry the weight or people wouldn't buy it if they didn't play 1 or 2. But then they just named it The Third Birthday, which is a terrible title because no one could, like, just looking at this would know what this is. It is Parasite Eve 3. This is an often maligned title for its story. It's not bad, though, in my opinion. Like, yeah, the story's really weird, but the gameplay isn't terrible, and there's a lot to it. The main character is kind of over-sexualized, but she kind of always was. Is as good as Parasite Eve 1 and 2? No, but it's just like an oddity to me that they just like, yeah, let's not name it Parasite Eve 3, but give this bizarre title The Third Birthday, and it's never getting re-released. Like I said, it didn't do too well, but it is a cool thing to have, and if you want to complete the trilogy, this is kind of it. This is definitely the last Parasite Eve game we're probably ever going to get. Square Enix does not do things like this anymore, and they don't have a small console like the PSP to put their kind of experimental games out like this. But yeah, this game is just, I mean, it's even on the case, it's hard to see that title, like Third Birthday. Like what were they thinking? You can't even like clearly see that as Aya Brea on the cover. Like, I don't know. I'm glad it was like that Parasite Eve got something after so long, but this was an odd way to go out. But it is a collectible game. I love the PSP. It is a graphically impressive game. So check it out if you're a fan of the series, Third Birthday. It's a very collectible PSP game. So let's go to a much less loved system than the prior ones I mentioned. Let's talk about the Wii U. Let's talk about Zombie U. This is almost more of an action game in terms of like Dead Rising or The Walking Dead. But what this was a very early Wii U game with that developer, Ubisoft of all people. I don't have a lot of Ubisoft games. Kind of went all out with the Wii U gamepad. It's how you manage your inventory. You can aim with it. You can do like investigative like blacklight looks through this, and you kind of had to survive a zombie apocalypse. It was actually a pretty good game. Very cheap on the Wii U to this day, and kind of an experience you can't get anywhere else. It was re-released as simply Zombie on other HD consoles of the time, like PS4, but the original Zombie U, the game's kind of original intent, still a very playable, fun zombie explorer survival game on the Wii U. And you know what? There's not too many of those on that console, so I would express checking this out if you have a Wii U, if you have a few extra bucks, still affordable, Zombie U. And going from one unloved console to something even less loved, we're talking about the Sega 32X. We're talking about the Sega CD and the 32X. We are talking about Night Trap. Now, a lot of people on my channel will already know what Night Trap is. It's one of the games that kind of brought the ESRB into existence along with Lethal Enforcers and Mortal Kombat. Is an FMV game where you must ostensibly protect a bunch of young girls as a security agent looking through cameras from vampires and their minions. It's so bad, it's good game. It's been re-released there's an original Sega Sega CD version, there's a 32X version, and there's a Sega 32X CD version, as you see here, which requires both. It has been re-released on modern consoles digitally and physically by Limited Run Games. But this is kind of my favorite. Back in the day, they thought this terrible game that people would want to buy it on the CD and the 32X. Like, you have the CD version, but let's make it look slightly better, by forcing them to buy a 32X. Like, people will run out and buy this. Why? I don't know, but this is a pretty collectible piece. I can't believe this game has such a following. It had so many releases even back then. But it is a funny horror game that I do suggest you check it out on any console of your choice of these days. Like I said, it's downloadable on the Switch. It's funny, it's weird, it's more fun to play with friends. Like, you're never gonna replay this. So get a couple friends together, have a good laugh, play some Night Trap. But this is my favorite version because it's a terrible game that you need two not so great kind of expansions for the Sega Genesis. I have them, I love them, but they're not the most famous thing. You need a 32X and a CD to play this version if you want to stay true to that original vision. And let's jump to another slightly obscure series that has a decent-sized fan base, however, but maybe not the most well version. We're talking about D on the Sega Saturn. Now, this has a PlayStation version. It is, I believe, also has a PC version, and its sequel, D2, is also on the Dreamcast, but that's not quite as good of a game. This is an early, I hate to say FMV game, but it's mostly a cinematic game told through cutscenes, where you play as a girl kind of investigating, let's just say, her lineage through a creepy Dracula-esque castle. And there's something eerie about this game that at the time was probably not intentional, but the old FMVs, like the PlayStation Saturn FMVs, make this game creepy. Like, the game's like kind of got this unintentional, like archaic, creepy, unnatural look, that uncanny valley thing. It's an interesting story. You could beat it fairly quickly if you know what you're doing, but it's kind of obtuse. You might have to look up what to do, but it's a pretty collectible game on the Saturn that most people think is only a PlayStation release, but D on the original Saturn is worth something to my horror collectors and my Saturn collectors out there. This is an odd one. I like this game, but I think it's creepy for reasons not originally intended. We're getting near the end, and like I said, horror adjacent. Is something that I would put to the next game. However, this is one of my favorite games of all time that scared me a lot, and that's, of course, Bloodborne, which I'll always talk about whenever I get the chance. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Everyone knows what Bloodborne is. I don't need to explain that to you. However, something often less talked about is, like, this game has really scary moments. Not only are you always tense and unnerved because you think you're about to die and lose a bunch of progress, but like there's legitimate like jump scares from enemies and sounds. The creepy aesthetic, the environments are never friendly. They always look like there's something right around the corner that could kill you, and there usually is. The design of things like giant spiders and werewolves, it has all those horror trappings, and it's just fantastic. So if you're like looking for a more modern horror like game that's challenging and is actually scary, Bloodborne. You know, if you're not into the Souls game, like I don't like action RPGs, look at this as a horror game, and I think you'll have a great time. Bloodborne. And the first, greatest, biggest, I'd say, horror game in terms of games that have horror trappings that aren't going to make your heart pop out is the legendary franchise. One of my favorite OG franchises of all time, and that is Castlevania. Yes, I'm a huge Castlevania fan, as many of you will know if you've seen my prior videos. And the best way to jump into this franchise, if you haven't, is to download the Castlevania Anniversary Collection on everything. PC, PlayStation, Switch, Xbox. Castlevania obviously homages to all the classic horrors. Dracula, obviously, but werewolves and Frankensteins, mummies. Castlevania kind of has it all. So if you're in a creepy mood but you don't want to be scared, you could always go and play the Castlevania games. And this Anniversary Collection is fantastic. What I'm holding here is a limited, very limited, physical edition of the game released by Limited Run Games, but I believe it's $20 on the PlayStation Store. You get Castlevania 1, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, Super Castlevania 4, I'm looking here because it's so many, Castlevania Bloodlines, Castlevania Adventure 1 and 2 from the Game Boy, and the first release of Kid Dracula, the NES version, all in one package. It's 8 games, the 4 classic Castlevanias, and then 4 more obscure titles, all in one package. Whenever you're in a spooky mood, check them out. My favorite out of the bunch, Castlevania 1 is probably my favorite NES one. Even though 3 is like a bigger, better game, 1 is just more playable and more like kind of pure. Like 3 is so hard and it's branching paths. If I just want like a quick play, I'll jump into 1. The big debate in my head is usually between Castlevania, the Genesis one, Bloodlines, and Castlevania 4. And most people will say Castlevania 4, but I like Bloodlines more. Yeah, you can't whip in all 8 directions, but it's got such great color palette and it pops. And you have 2 playable characters that are very different, Eric Lecard and he uses a spear, which adds an entirely different kind of feel than John Morris, who uses a whip, like the classic Castlevania whip. So you kind of have like 2 very different play styles to kind of play around with, and the music's fantastic, and the Genesis like just has makes that game look fantastic. Super Castlevania 4 is legendary. However, like there's just something about Rondo that has like a style that I like more. And of course, the Game Boy games are rough, but they're a fun addition here. And Kid Dracula, basically Kid Dracula is just Mega Man Castlevania, a very cutesy, believe it or not, like shooting platformer that you go through. So if you're like, I'm in a spooky mood, what do I want to play? Go and get Castlevania, the Anniversary Collection. If you've never played it, it's a cheap way to play one of the greatest franchises of all time. And that wraps it up, ladies and gentlemen. Damn, that went longer than I thought. But I love horror. I can go on about so many of these games for so long. I have more horror games, but like I said, this video would have been even longer. Maybe I'll do a part 2 next Halloween or something. But yeah, geez, what a great genre. I mean, horror games, with the exception of like maybe Resident Evil 4, have never put gameplay first in a lot of ways, because that's not what it's about. And that's an odd thing to say. Like if you want gameplay first, you go to like you don't go to Resident Evil. You kind of go towards like Devil May Cry, like tight control and twitch movement. Horror is more about making you feel powerless a lot of ways. And that's a tough thing to kind of nail, right? That's a tough kind of thing, like, oh, I'm powerless. Like, how is this going to be fun? But you got to get into that kayfabe. You kind of got to get into that mindset. Like, I'm helpless. I need to survive. And when companies get it right, it really can, like these games can become legendary. And like I said, horror fans like myself, but ones even bigger than me, are so passionate about these. These games quickly become very collectible, very talked about. And I'm glad to see that the genre, with how mainstream video games are in the modern era, are still going strong. That what is ostensibly, no, definitely a niche genre, horror, because a lot of normies aren't into this stuff, guys. Is going so strong with Dead Space and Silent Hill coming back and Resident Evil going for both action and horror. And there's so many great indie titles out there, ones I couldn't fit into this video. I am so glad to be a horror fan. It is such a unique genre that you're not going to find anything else, things that you aren't going to find anywhere else. So yeah, that's it, guys. Let me know yet again, what are your favorite horror games? What are the things you look forward to in horror games? What are some of the hidden gems? What are your favorite big franchises? Let me know. What do you want to see in the future of horror? I love this channel for the discussions that I get about any of my videos, but this one is of a particular note to me, and I want to hear what you guys have to think about it. Happy Halloween, happy All Hallows Eve, Dia de los Muertos, whatever you're celebrating during this spooky season. I hope you're having a good time. Keep playing video games. My name is Mike. This has been Chip Damage, and please take care of yourself.